So, video games. They receive just as much criticism as they do love. Many see them as a waste of time and create stigmas around them out of ignorance. Despite the fact that bare minimum research as in Googling for like 2 minutes, will land you with studies and evidence of games improving areas such as, but not limited to, cognitive function, memorization, and even problem solving. But all of that will be dismissed for one narrow-minded reason or another, but sometimes they can help out in the smallest yet impactful ways. And in this latest entry of Mega Man and Chill, I'll be exploring some of these ideas, how they pertain to the conflict of today's recollection of a past story, and how this one goofy racing game spinoff actually got me a driver's license. Yeah, I wish I was joking. But certain games do help in different areas of life. I should make a separate video in the future diving deeper into the aspects which benefit more practical skills, but today I just want to focus on the more relieving side of them. What I mean is that sometimes just the act of playing the game can get you out of a funk. When consumed healthily and not as a time-sinking addiction, games can just assist in clearing the mind, calming you down, and just providing some momentary distance from what's stressing you. Then, when mentally ready, you're prepared to tackle that problem head on with renewed vigor. I've had countless moments like that from both childhood and into adulthood. Times where life was just beating the shit out of me, relentlessly, ceaselessly, and firing up something fast-paced and challenging like Mega Man was enough to re-energize myself and restore some optimism while challenging the world the next day. Or when I'm in a deep depression that lingers for a while, I put something on slow like a strategy RPG in my spare time, like Shining Force, like you guys have been seeing in my live streams lately. Just going at a slower pace, exploring the fictional world of whatever RPG I'm playing is often to just appreciate what I have in reality and then go back out to face reality with a clearer mind, now that I have something that forced me to sit down long enough to reflect. Mega Man Battle and Chase did something similar, but not in a way that you might expect. You see, following one summer, I believe the summer right after I graduated high school, so this was definitely in the latter half of 2010. It was a time for me to start looking for a job, and there was a constant feeling of guilt when relying on my parents to get me to and from work on a regular basis, so I needed to stop putting off getting my driver's license, because public transportation and being a pedestrian in Louisiana is risky, to say the least. We don't have the highest crime and murder rates in the nation for nothing. So my dad started helping me to learn how to drive, but it was a slow start that was cut short. Fast forward a year later, beyond a divorce scare from my parents that pushed things back, and I was able to get back to practice on a regular basis again. But you see, here's a little detail I've been leaving out. I sucked. Sure, my dad kept saying stuff like, well, you're doing better than your brothers and your sisters when they were learning. But come on, even a baby could spot that I sucked at driving. He was just saying that to not demoralize me. Then again, it looked like he had horror stories in stock about their driving. I think he said one of them even drove into a ditch. Jesus Christ, maybe it wasn't a total lie now that I think back on it, yeah. And hey, I know I'm not alone here. Learning to drive is a pretty common ordeal that people go through. It's scary at first, especially when you know early on how dangerous or costly certain mistakes can be. Of course, once you get the hang of it, those fears fade away and you realize you were afraid of nothing. But that doesn't take away from those initial fears. It's a pretty normal thing to go through. But in my case, it was a little different. My dad wanted to be 100% certain that I was ready to take the wheel on my own, without anyone in the car with me. I mean, it makes sense. When it was time to take the test, the hand-holding was over. But man, he did not make that reassurance easy. One of the things I struggled the most with at the time was going in reverse. I still wasn't used to the idea of frequently alternating from mirror to mirror and checking blind spots either, and I had terrible judgment in terms of how close I was to stuff like ditches. So at that point, my hyperfixation on trying to improve those areas caused me to not pay enough attention to the stuff that I was already doing good at. I'd be making all kinds of mistakes, and my dad would over-exaggerate them all with his reactions, not exactly helping in the process, because Dad, and he still does to this day, has a bad tendency of not knowing how to control the tone of his voice. I vividly remember seeing the equivalent of his soul exiting his body as I almost drove into a ditch by accident while parking, and he said, "Oh my God," under his breath. Then one day my mom got into the back seat and yeah. Having two overreacting parents in the car hammering home your mistakes definitely exacerbated the issue if it wasn't already. Yeah, pro tip, if you can afford it, don't let family teach you how to drive, no matter how much you love them. I continued to feel demoralized to the point where after that lesson with both of them, I instinctively fled to my room and physically started feeling ill at my own inability to do something as simple as drive. Now that I'm able to examine my own story in the present, I can see how my reaction could be seen as over dramatic, but we have to look at this from the perspective of a younger me who had a demolished sense of self-esteem. My environment and peers were some of the worst influences on me, and I was constantly told how inadequate I was at everything. Not by my parents, don't get that twisted. People like other adults, like my own brother and my other siblings to a limited degree, just to name a few. Not to mention I never had the opportunity to be assessed for mental disorders that I was suspected to have ever since I was a kid, such as autism. 2025 will be a big year for me in that regard. As a side note, I'm finally going to get closure on that one, and we'll go through the assessment process for an official diagnosis, but story for another time. With all of that in mind, the idea that I couldn't develop even the simplest of skills paralyzed me in that bed. It was a constant thought of, if I can't even learn how to drive, how far could I even go in life? When you're told you suck all the time, that fucks with you hard. It makes you question your ability to do anything. So getting behind that wheel with all of those insecurities compounded together, and yeah, I look back on that now as a grown adult and identified that was the problem. But I didn't know that at the time as a confused 19-year-old. All I knew was that if I gave up before my life even started, I'd never be happy. I just didn't know what to do or who to talk to or anything, so I turned to pretty much the only comfort I had: a video game. Now, the irony of me playing a racing game at the time isn't going over my head. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be making this video. I just had my PS2 conveniently connected at the time, and the Mega Man X collection was already in the disc drive because I was playing it earlier before driving practice. I still have no idea on what possessed me to even play Battle and Chase while I was feeling down, because at that time in the past, I wasn't that fond of the game. But I think I just wanted something a little unfamiliar at the time, and that'd be good enough to distract myself from all those chaotic thoughts. Or maybe it was just me instinctively gravitating towards it because of my challenges at the time. I remember my dad always telling me while I was behind the wheel, driving's easy, it's just like a video game, which kinda annoyed me, I'm not gonna lie. Because one, I don't even like racing or driving sims, they're boring to me. And two, the whole comparison wasn't that effective because it gives an unrealistic expectation of what real driving's like. I knew I was a pretty introverted and shut-in kid, but come on dad, I had the capacity to understand concepts outside of a video game. Anyway, as I was playing through some random courses in Battle and Chase, I was slowly getting immersed into the gameplay. I just wanted to focus on anything other than having my failures playing on repeat in the back of my head. But in hindsight, Battle and Chase wasn't exactly the most ideal game to help with that. I was trying to forget about driving while playing a game where I'm driving. How? But it wasn't so bad. For one, I was enjoying the gameplay more than I expected. I was never much of a fan of Mario Kart, and Battle and Chase was clearly kart inspired. So that was a little unexpected. But secondly, as my thumbs rolled on those analog sticks, cutting corners and began smoothly speeding through the courses with more precision, I thought to myself, you know, maybe Dad was onto something. I still think it's not a very good comparison. If I were to teach someone to drive personally, I'd certainly use more practical examples. But I at least got a better feel for the act of driving itself while having some fun. I believe I was simply too overstimulated by the pressure and criticism during my driving lessons to actually calm the mind and pay closer attention to what I was doing. So sitting in front of that TV, all alone, being able to reflect in solitude without any of the clamor to distract me, it did something to me. Because when the next day rolled around and it was time to practice again, my dad was quiet. He let me drive all the way to my grandmother's house. And the quality of my driving from the previous day to that moment was stark. Night and day difference. I can tell it even threw him off, almost like he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. The drive back home was the same, but before we got out of the car, he had this goofy ass looking smile that he failed to hide, as all he said was, "Wow," and gave me a little handshake. To me, that was better than a generic "good job" response, because I knew that one word meant the same thing plus more, just based on the way he said it, and I know my dad better than anybody. To this day, I still can't give you a definitive answer as to what the game did to me exactly. I can only speculate based on everything I experienced and explained here, but when it comes to defining the science behind it, yeah, no, I'm not the guy for that. All I knew was that from that day forward, my driving only saw further improvement. moment, and then I was ready. I enrolled in a little mandatory 2-day class that our state forced upon me at the time, one that I had to pay for. And once I was given all the materials I needed to study for the written part of the license acquisition and received my certificate, it was time. Keep this certificate in mind. You'll see why in a second. I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't nervous when my mom dropped me off to the DMV, but I knew I had to power through and beat this thing. Once I walked up and stood in line waiting to be tended to, I saw something bizarre. Someone ahead of me in line showed her little certificate to the receptionist, and she was able to skip straight to the written test. And I looked at the certificate in my hand, and I thought to myself, nah, it can't be that easy. I thought that girl probably just took some super special and expensive class that let her skip around the driving test, but I showed the lady my certificate at the desk, and she pointed me in the same direction as the girl. I contained myself on my way to the seat in the waiting area, but as soon as I sat down, I whispered to myself, "What?" in disbelief. All that practicing, all that depression and self-doubt, and all that triumph after the game helped me focus better, only for an anticlimactic ending. I already knew I was going to ace the written test because it was all basic shit to understand, but no one told me those certificates made people eligible for skipping half of the test. I remember being both relieved and disappointed. I had this awkward smile on my face for my picture for the license. It didn't feel earned, but the more I reflect on it today, I've steadily understood that how I received the license wasn't important. I had to understand that had I sunk into that pool of misery and self-doubt, there'd be no drive to get behind the wheel and try again. Oh my god, that pun wasn't intended. I may have acquired the license in an anticlimactic manner, but the effort I put into it, despite feeling like the most hopeless bozo, was the real journey. Had I not turned to this silly spin-off racing game in a time where I was ready to give up, it may have either taken much longer to try again, or I'd have silently just accepted the lie that I was too stupid to be capable of basic, practical, everyday skills like driving. While I still believe, to a degree, that the idea of Mega Man Battle and Chase helping with the act of driving itself is an absurd one, it still helped with the process of mentally preparing me to try harder. It was that brief intermission I needed to settle my overstimulated brain down. The act of sitting down, playing a game relating to the current problem, driving, helped me reframe the situation and realize, yeah, it's a real simple game, just like how simple it is to drive. Because yeah, despite my challenges with learning to drive at the time, I never once thought driving overall was hard. It was just normal stuff I had to isolate and improve upon. I had to not allow all the pressure to distract me from improving those areas, and I think the game helped calm me down. The experience of sitting in that room alone with my loud thoughts taught me to quiet my mind in a way, to focus squarely on just the road, my surroundings, and my own actions. Because think about it, you want to win a game, right? So most of the time you're quiet, hopefully calm, and your mind is focused only on the feedback of what's being displayed on the screen. So any other thoughts are pushed into the back of your mind. They're still there, they just become quieter as your focus gradually zones into the game. You're in the present moment, and that's what matters the most in life. My problem was overthinking what hadn't even happened yet, and dwelling on past pains that needed to stay in the place where they belonged, in the past. Just that simple act of playing a pretty relaxing racing spin-off was all I needed to get back up and try one more time. And look what it got me. The license I wanted. Stay chill, y'all.